What's up, everybody? Welcome to Draft Chaff. This is episode number 170. My name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts, and joining me, as per usual, Ben Fisher. What's up, dude?
170, huh?
Yeah, we're here.
It's occurring to me that I may have missed the opportunity to make some jokes last episode, but we can gloss over that.
I was glad you didn't. Well, this week we have a little bit of a different take on an episode we've been kind of doing every set or so. Instead of doing a rare roundup this week, we're actually just going to talk about all the Enchanting Tales in this set. But before we do, our usual housekeeping, do check out the Discord if you're not already in there. We'd love to see you over there. Come say hi. Chat about your trophy decks, your what's the picks, any sort of discussions you have around all these formats that we've come to be playing lately, and with different rotations and things, we've got a channel for that as well. The link to that is in the episode description as well as on our Twitter page. And if you'd like to support the show directly, you can do so on Patreon, not right now, but in November when we do our full relaunch for the Patreon. But anyway, you can check that out at patreon.com/draftchappod.
We appreciate all of you patrons. You're the best.
All right, on to our Cracker Draft type thing. Ben, this looks like a pack one, pick two.
Here it is. So this pack one, pick one was pretty easy. I took Goblin Bombardment. I took it over Bramble Familiar, Back for Seconds, Picnic Ruiner, and Taken by Nightmares. And sure, you could argue that a card like Taken by Nightmares is more generically good, but Goblin Bombardment, this card is so strong in the right deck. If you are along the vector of dumping a bunch of things onto the board, then this card can just deal 6-7 to your opponent's face. It has the upside of kind of shutting off all the removal spells, or at least decreasing their effectiveness by some flat percent, because now you just have this flat fling effect. It pairs really well with turn against effects. It's super versatile, right? It can make combat math a nightmare. Your opponent can't block your 2/2 with their 3/3 anymore, because then you just fling a rat at it to finish it off. Really strong card. Now, pack one, pick two is where things get a little worse. For those not watching on screen, let me read off this pack. We've got an Unassuming Sage, the one in the white 2/2. When it ETBs, you can pay 2. And if you do, you make a sorcerer roll attached to it. This card has been just fine. Even within the red-white celebration decks, I haven't found this one to be one that I love running. It's a little unexciting on 2. And even for this kind of like low drop with a kicker, I prefer the Bards, the 3-mana 3/2 that you can pay 1 to make a Young Hero roll on something. I think Young Hero is so much better than Sorcerer in these red-white beatdown decks, especially because a lot of these things have low toughness. So the Sage has been just fine for me, just kind of mid.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I do think there's a place for one copy of Unassuming Sage in those decks, because the Scry actually really helps you not just drown in lands. I've used that quite effectively to make sure that I'm actually casting spells and keeping Celebration going.
We've got a Scarecrow Guide. That's the 2-mana 2/1 reach, and you can pay 1 to add a mana of any color, so it can filter a mana once per turn. This one I haven't needed to run yet, even in my most egregious splashy decks. I've been happy running Prophetic Prisms or Evolving Wilds or something else. The Fawn has been, Rider Fawn has been just fine too. Haven't had to stoop this low yet, or I guess this high. Living Lectern. I haven't seen this card do much. There's not, this is like a little confusing vector here. If there was some sort of like artifact going to the graveyard thing happening, then I could see maybe this working. There are some blue decks that can benefit from putting up an 0/4 blocker early, but then I guess what are you supposed to do? Sack it once they have like a 4/4, at which point you're sacking to put a sorcerer roll on something and drawing a card. I don't know. That just puts you more behind. I don't like this card at all.
Yeah, I played it in blue-red decks as essentially just a big wall to keep me from dying against aggro stuff in the beginning of the game, and then eventually later it becomes something I just bargain away when I have no other choice. Definitely not something to be taking this early.
Now we've got a Hopeful Vigil here. I like this one. That's the one in the white. Enchantment, ETB, makes a 2/2 token with Vigilance. It's a knight. And when it's put in the graveyard, you scry 2, and you can pay 2 and a white to sack it. Auto triggers Celebration. It pairs really well with Bargain. This and Torch the Tower make a funny combo of like scrying and then scrying again. This is a nice little combo with stockpiling Celebrants too, which also lets you scry and then functionally draws you this card as well. And a 2-mana 2/2 is, something that most red-white decks can make good use of even on turn 4 or 5. Gnawing Crescendo is next up. The 2 in a red creatures you control get 2/0 until end of turn. And then whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you get a rat. Something a little funny about this effect, you want this to be the last spell you cast during the game. So I don't really understand the whole whenever a non-token thing dies, you get a rat. I get that it incentivizes your opponent to block your rats instead. So then your non-token creatures get in. They're probably more valuable. They get to survive if your opponent blocks, such as that. It disincentivizes those blocks a little bit. But I don't like it. Yeah, I guess it's upside. I just want this to be the last spell that I cast in a game. And I think some of its value is unfortunately concentrated in that second clause that doesn't actually do too much.
Well, I don't know. I just think about it like an overrun effect without trample, and it has some upside in that if it doesn't end up closing the game out, you still have a board that you can run another Gnawing Crescendo into and still do just fine.
That's true. I've died to this card a handful of times, and if I was in like a significantly go wide black red rats vector, I would absolutely play one, maybe even two.
Oh, I play at least one in every red white or red black deck.
Wow. Okay, maybe I should value it a little higher then. I guess it is just like an effective combat trick too.
It's just like it's Imidane Recruiter's little brother, basically. I mean, it's a finisher for the deck. You absolutely want one in all of your aggro decks.
Imidane's Recruiter's little brother. Interesting. I'm gonna hold you to that one. Fell Horseman's next. That's the 3-mana 3/3. When it dies, it gets put on the bottom. Because it'd be really annoying if you could loop these. The sorcery adventure attached to it, Deathly Ride. You return target creature from your graveyard to your hand for one in the black. This one's just whatever. If you have some good cards in your deck, for example, I played one of these in that black-white deck from our live draft with Ariette. And yeah, you could get back Ariette when your opponent inevitably tries to kill her. So it's fine, but nothing to write home about. Cooped Up, that's the pacifism effect. The 1 in the white enchant creature can attack or block, and then you can pay 2 in a white, exile it. I haven't gotten to do any of the tricks with this one yet. I've found that there's usually better things to do with my mana in these super aggressive red-white decks that want this. But you can do the thing where you put the exile enchanted creature clause on the stack and then sack this to bargain to kick a torch to the tower or something like that. So Cooped Up has some funny play to it, although I haven't really seen anyone make use of it.
Yeah, I think that Wizards actually made it 3 mana very specifically, because 3 mana makes it just expensive enough that you very often would rather not bother doing that in conjunction with one of your bargain spells. You'd rather just bargain something and then cast a creature and move on with your life.
Brave the Wilds is up. That's the green sorcery. It has bargain. And if it was bargained, one of your lands becomes a 3/3 with haste. That's still a land. Elemental. I don't think that matters. And then you also get to search your library for a basic, reveal it, put in your hand, and shuffle. Fine in the multicolored piles. Not my favorite way. This is like middle of the road level splashing stuff. I do prefer Prophetic Prism, Treasure Makers, and E-Wilds over this, but it's whatever. It's fine. Armory Mice. I'm continually going higher and higher on the mice. All the mice. The uncommon one, this one, the Battle Mouse at rare. Mice are actually pretty good. This is often going to be a 2-mana 3/3 attacker, and that's exactly what the red-white wants to do.
Yeah, again, not something you're taking this highly. And you can see even with the 17 lands data that's up, this is average last seen at about 7. So you've got plenty of time to pick these up. Not something I want to pick 2 here, but they're really solid 2-drops in those red-white decks, yeah.
Now we got a Glass Casket here as our first uncommon. Out of the commons, anything sticking out to you?
Yeah, I would say just looking at what we've got here, Cooped Up and Hopeful Vigil are probably top 2. I was saying I'm pretty high on Gnawing Crescendo, but again, that's a card that you find late in the game. You can wield them, late in the draft rather. You can wield them. You don't need to worry about picking those up early, and we don't even know what we're playing yet. So I'd be fine taking. Yeah, I'm probably on the Hopeful Vigil, maybe Cooped Up, but with the Goblin Bombardment, the Vigil just seems to mesh better.
Anyway, I mentioned we have Glass Casket here. Really strong removal spell. No complaints. It hits a lot of stuff. When you trade 2 mana for their 3 mana, it feels good. And not a lot of artifact removal incidentally running around. Sometimes you'll get hit by that oof. And then what are you going to say? You just got to go oof. That's just how it is sometimes. But this will usually take care of something on the other side. Next uncommon is Ego Drain. No, not looking like a fairies thing. And I don't even think this card is very good within fairies. And then we've got an Ashiok's Reaper here. The 4-mana 3/3, when an enchantment's put in the graveyard, you draw a card. Again, I think we were both talking about on the last episode, I've never seen anyone draw a single card off of this. It just doesn't line up that often.
Yeah.
We have an Enchanting Tales still in the pack. We have an Intruder Alarm. Sick art. This is the one that's...
It's not a good card, though.
Yeah, no. This is the one that's 2 and a blue. Enchantment. Creatures don't untap during the controller's untap steps. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, untap all creatures. Look, I'm sure there's infinite combos with this in Commander. If you go to an FNM and you see this and you're like, ooh, that's nice, don't even take it over a good removal spell. This card probably costs like 10 cents now, right?
Yeah, a lot of these Enchanting Tales are very inexpensive monetarily. And you're losing a lot of win rate value by taking them in your draft picks because, well, we'll get into all of that. Intruder Alarm's not one to take. I'm probably on a Hopeful Vigil here. I've talked a lot in the last couple of episodes about how every card in your deck in this format needs to synergize with each other. And while Glass Casket's probably the best card in the pack, I think it just doesn't do enough with Goblin Bombardment that I'd want to take it. Early on in the draft, I think you're okay wasting maybe 2 or 3 picks, your first 3 picks or so, on cards that don't synergize well, and then that helps you find your lane and figure out where you're actually going for the rest of the draft. So absolutely wouldn't fault anybody for taking the Glass Casket here. I'd probably just be on Hopeful Vigil because I think it sets me up best to have a deck that is synergizing well going into the rest of the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I picked this one because we are talking about Enchanting Tales today, and such a huge gap between Goblin Bombardment and Intruder Alarm, both of which are rare in the Enchanting Tales bonus sheet. And I did actually end up slamming the Hopeful Vigil here. Funny enough, Glass Casket wheeled, as did the Armory Mice. I was very surprised by that. And I went on to Trophy with this deck. I can share the details real quick. This deck ended up being very strong. The Glass Casket made it in, of course. I had a bunch of stockpiling Celebrants, 3 of them. I had 2 Princess Takes Flight, obviously a Mondo combo, just land Princess Takes Flight. If you've never gotten to use Celebrants to bounce Princess Takes Flight and then replay Princess Takes Flight in the same turn, you haven't lived. It is ridiculous. And then a bunch of okay 2-drops. I picked up an Armory Mice, a Charming Scoundrel I got lucky to open in pack 2. Had to play a Skewer Slinger and an Unassuming Sage as 2-drops. I didn't love having to do that, but I was a little low on 2-mana plays. Then just a really strong removal suite. Cut in Witchstalker Frenzy, Torch the Tower, and Expel the Interlopers at my top end, and even a Redcap Gutter Dweller. Just a red-white value rare pile that had a pretty aggressive slant. So this is a very fun deck to play, and I do have to thank some people in the Discord for helping out. Thank you to the Chaficionados that helped me craft this deck. If you'd like to help me craft decks, definitely like, comment, subscribe, all that. Hop in the Discord, most importantly, because it's a lot of fun over there.
All right, on to our Teferi Tivol. This is our Roses and Thorns style segment where Ben and I share a high and a low from the past week. Ben, I went first last week. What's up with you this week?
All right, let's start with some Teferis. Things have been going pretty good at school. I like my classes a lot. I don't think my students this year have discovered that I have a podcast yet, which, that's probably for the best. Unless some of the people from last year who discovered it end up telling them. We'll see if that ends up happening. But things have been going well. My classes are all nice. My students have been really buying into the whole scientific process thing. I try to lean into it with my class a bit, have them really, the more you put in, the more you get out, right? And that's how it works in school. So I've also had some fun running some new clubs this year. I'm running the Astronomy Club with some very eager upperclassmen that just kind of wanted to get it going. And they've been doing great at organizing and making posters and flyers. And the teachers that are listening, when a student just kind of takes something in their own and you don't have to do a single thing but kind of supervise, it's always the best. And that's kind of what these girls are doing for the astronomy club. So I'm very happy about that. Also starting up a science Olympiad. It's like a competition team. Both you and I absolutely would have been on this, and it would have been a lot of fun. So we didn't get to do it in high school, but I guess I get to supervise it now. So
Sweet.
And I've got an upcoming RCQ this Sunday. Got a busy weekend. I'm going to a football game on Saturday, which I rarely do. I'm taking my dad for his birthday, so that'll be fun. And then the RCQ on Sunday. So two very different types of competitions. We'll see which ends up being better and more fun. I'm hoping the RCQ, but I'm in for a good football game too. My tibble is that I left some really delicious grapes at school. I forgot to eat them. I don't know what else to say. I got home and I audibly yelled because I was so upset that I had left these grapes at school, and now they're sitting there. They're getting warm, sitting in my lunchbox on my desk where I left it. Such a bummer. Yeah, it's not a huge problem, but it's been a good week, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you should just take a moment to reflect on how amazing your week has been. If that is the low point.
Yeah, I guess so. What's up with you?
Yeah, my Teferi is that, well, while you're listening to this, I'm either on the plane or have landed and am enjoying my trip in Zion. We're pre-recording this episode a bit in advance because I'll be out there hiking and such. So likely I'll have more to share next week on just how the trip went and different things that I got to do and see. I'll hope that my Tybalt for next week isn't anything injury related, but we'll just cross our fingers on that one. This week, I also don't really have much of a Tybalt. It's been a pretty chill, kind of just unassuming week. So
cool.
Yeah, on to our listener question of the week. This week, our question comes from Dorrigan in the Discord. And again, if you want to ask a listener question of the week and get it answered on the show, you can jump into the Discord, check out the listener questions channel in the Discord, where we pick up all of these questions. So Dorrigan says, "Whoa, signpost uncommons. Which is your favorite from a flavor perspective?" Dorrigan's between blue-red for the Sorcerer's Apprentice thing and blue-white for the Ice Queen thing. He says definitely not Frozen.
It was funny. They did a card called like Queen of like Icy Queen or Queen of Ice, right? It was a common from the last set, and it had an adventure on it that did the thing. It tapped down one of your opponent's creatures, and it didn't untap it in the next untap step. And then it was like a 2/3 or something. So it was sort of like a Frostlinks effect. I'm kind of surprised they didn't just straight up reprint it, but I guess they kind of had to retcon it because there could only be one Icy Queen in this set, and she had to be a legend, Hilda. Yeah, I like a lot of these. I gotta say, I'm excited to dig into the flavor of this set a little bit because Ruby, Daring Tracker, is actually one of the main heroes of the story. That's the red-green 1/2 uncommon, the one with haste, kind of themed after Little Red Riding Hood, but also, I mean, in the art, she's carrying a crossbow. In the story, she's trying to find her long lost brother. It's a whole thing. So that's interesting in that she's a named character. But I don't think any of the other uncommons were actually named. Oh, Troyan was. Ruby actually meets Troyan along with Kellen during their journey. But the other ones, I don't think so. Some of them, they have their stories told by the cards, though. So Ash Party Crasher, for example, you can spot Ash on a whole bunch of different cards. Same with some of the other ones. Neva, Stalked by Nightmares. Totentans has like a whole bunch of them. And these are cards at all levels, right? The X in a red, what's that called? Totentan's Piper, Totentan's Swarm, whatever it is.
Song
the
of
X in
Totentans?
red. Yeah, that's the one. That's obviously styled after him. So he's got this like rare that pairs with him pretty well. Johann Apprentice Sorcerer has the Apprentice's Folly, and then a whole bunch of the blue-red spells cards are. They tell this funny story about this apprentice Johann who like started a fire with an elemental and then made a water elemental to put it out. But then those elementals start fighting, and then he just keeps making more elementals to try to like stop the other ones. Yeah, exactly. It's a very cute story. As for my personal favorite flavor here, I think I'm on Ash. Because let's be honest, I love a good party. And whatever enough. Ash is up to, clearly enjoying some ales and revelry. That's my kind of festivities. So that, or maybe Greta. who seems to be partying in her own way.
Yeah, Ruby was the one that stood out to me as well, actually, I'll say Johan was the one that stood out to me because the whole Fantasia thing mixed with the Apprentice's Folly is just like perfect. Like that's just chef's kiss. Hats off. I do like the spin they took with the Red Riding Hood thing with Ruby, in that like she's not this helpless little like, oh, I'm going to grandmother's house. She's like killing witch stalkers and stuff. So like that's pretty cool. And Troyan I like for different reasons. I don't know that there was necessarily like, at least to me, there's not an obvious top-down design that they were like, hey, let's take this this typical like Grimm's fairy tale or whatever and turn it into a card. Mm-hmm. But this is the only card really here of this 10 card kind of window we have for the signpost uncommons that touches on the greater story of hey, the multiverse is not so multi anymore, and we've got some ways that non-planeswalkers can move between planes. Yeah, it's just like kind of dripped in here with Troyan, so I like that a lot. That's good flavor for me. That kind of helps tie things into where the big arc of the story is going.
Yeah, some of these I find are really elegant designs. Neva Stalked by Nightmares. I want to know more. I almost want a side story just about what's happening there. Like, is she under the sleeping curse, or is she under some other kind of curse? Is she being stalked? Sir Armont the Redeemer, what's going on there? Like, there's these like witch knights or something in the background, and then like a little. I don't really know what's happening there. And without any flavor text, it's kind of hard to say what's happening. I mean, mechanically, maybe someone that Sir Armont knows becomes a monster. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of little story pieces woven throughout a lot of the draft commons. So once again, Draft Chaff stays winning. We get some of the coolest flavor and story stuff in the set. I think my favorite one to play so far has actually been Greta. And Greta just it does it all with food, right?
My favorite to play has been Ash.
Yeah, Ash is up there for me too.
All right, so let's dive into our main topic this week. As we mentioned, this week we're going through all of the Enchanting Tales. We're going to talk about whether they were hits or misses, and some things to keep in mind and think about when you're drafting with these and you see them come around the table. Should you take them? Should you not? When should you take them? If you should take them at all? And we'll kind of walk through those. If you're not watching the video version, we have all of them up in video, so you can kind of see copies of each of them as we talk through them. And let's get into it because we've got a lot of cards to cover.
Enchanting Tales? Don't you mean Enchanting Fails?
Yeah, for the most part. There's a slim sliver of them that aren't failures in terms of the draft context. Obviously, a lot of these are just constructed staples, and they're like phenomenal cards to have in constructed formats, but we're a limited podcast, so that's the context we're looking at these.
Yeah, let's just get this out of the way right now. Some of these we're going to say suck, and that's because in Limited they do. A lot of these will have the same type of effect where you are putting a card down on the board that has a really interesting and cool and unique effect, but it's not something that tends to win you games of Limited. So without having to repeat ourselves every time, know that if we say this one is just don't play it, it's usually for something along those lines. It's just not the kind of card you play in Limited if you want to win games. That being said, we just saw Goblin Bombardment, right? Which is one of the higher performing cards in the set overall. So there are definitely some bangers here, and there's even some ones with very niche applications. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time on some of these Enchanting Tales, and we'll kind of gloss over the Enchanting Fails.
Yeah, and I'll say too, we aren't necessarily going to give these letter grades or any kind of prescriptive grade. We're going to talk about them a little more contextually. So take everything we're saying within the context of your draft. You may find some situations where some of these are less failures than we're saying they are. Maybe you'll be able to make them work in certain contexts, but in general, this is what we've seen.
Let's kick it off with Blind Obedience. We're going to kind of treat these cards as though you know what they are. We're not going to read every line of text on them because, let's be honest, these are all reprints, right? Most people have seen these before. Blind Obedience, maybe we'll give like a little hint to each one. That's the one that makes things come in tapped, and you can extort stuff by paying black/white. This one I did lose to once. It was a slow blue-white deck, actually, that was able to just grind out, kind of tempo me down a little bit, and drain me out for, I think, 5 points of life over the game. Then again, I wasn't playing the most aggressive deck. I think I was on blue green or something. So this is a way you can close out with this unique face burn effect. I think this one has value in a like a mid range black or white or maybe like an Abzan adjacent deck, but this doesn't really belong in like red white. I mean, making your opponent's stuff come in tapped can be good, but I don't think that's worth a full card.
No, in red white and like any sort of aggressive deck, you typically would just rather play a 2-mana creature that's going to affect the board and actually progress your game plan. I do think this has a home in the blue white tap decks because it does actually trigger some of your tap things. Some of the ones that are like whenever an opponent's creature becomes tapped, not necessarily the ones that care about you tapping your opponent's stuff.
I don't know, it would proc like that.
And it slows like all the aggressive decks down, so it gives you time to kind of establish a board and get some momentum going, or at least kind of figure out ways to win against the super aggressive decks. So it does have a home in those, but it's a very, very niche home, and it basically shouldn't go in any other deck.
Dawn of Hope is up next. That's the 2-mana one. Whenever you gain life, you pay 2, and then you can pay 4 to make a soldier. This is too slow. In a very late game, very grindy deck, maybe like green white, something like that, where you're making food and you have the ability to, stall out and crack them. But I don't think the green white vector wants to be doing that. Yeah, the green white vector, it can gain a lot of value from these auras, right? From the rolls. I think one of the best cards in green white is the Tangle Lookout, right? The 3-mana 2/3 that whenever an aura enters, you draw a card. Just a regular old Enchantress card. And that one can help green white mid range kind of power through to the late game. I think something like that would be a much better engine than this because, this is an enchantment, so it can proc some of the Enchantress stuff. But paying 4 to make a 1/1, I don't know. This format just isn't really about that.
It's also got way too many clarifying details, right? You have to have gained life a turn. Then you have to have 2 mana up that you want to spend to draw a card.
Yeah.
It's very slow, very relying on you to have this other thing. And this is not a life gain set. Yes, you can crack food to gain life. There are ways to gain life, Baronati, getting lifelink and such like that. But you're not having an easy time making sure you're gaining life every turn. And so this isn't like a reliable effect you can trigger. And to your point, 6 mana for the first 1/1 and then 4 mana after that for any 1/1 is just not enough to win games in this format.
Grasp of Fate is the next one. This one I think is the best so far. That's the 3-mana O-Ring. It's basically templated for Commander, where it says you can exile up to 1 target non-land permanent each player controls. It's for each opponent, rather. I guess it just kind of multi-triggers on Arena because there's only one opponent. They really should template that on Arena so that it just kind of stops having you select after you've already selected your only available opponent. I don't know, whatever. No big deal. This is an Oblivion Ring. It's just a little bit hard to cast. I do play this in decks, especially my decks with like 9 to 10 planes. If you start going down to like 7 planes, with no additional fixing, then it's looking kind of risky. And sometimes this will just get stranded. But even on like turn 5 or 6, like playing this and then a cheap creature, the red white decks can make good use of that. This one I take pretty highly.
Yep, this will go in any white based deck. Unconditional removal is phenomenal, and it doesn't just deal with creatures; it'll deal with anything. So yeah, take these pretty highly. This one's an uncommon, so you will see this kind of come around, and not every deck can actually cast it. So solid removal for any white deck that can cast it.
We've got Greater Aromancy. This one's nice and simple. It's a mythic. Enchantments you control have Shroud. Enchanting creatures you control have Shroud. No one is going so deep into the Enchantress thing with auras that you care for this effect.
Nope.
Plus, even if you did, it still wouldn't be worth the card. I mean, there's that green combat trick, right? Where it gives the noble roll and also hexproof for the turn. So, and even that is a better card than this. Take this one for your commander decks, like, I don't know, 10th pick in real life and paper, and just don't pick this on Arena.
This is one of the few that still has actual value, though. I think this is still a $10 card or plus. So,
oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I did see that people were playing in Historic the Catlock deck with 9 lives plus Solemnity plus now Greater Aromancy as an additional layer of protection for that deck. So that's kind of funny if you feel like making your opponents miserable and not letting them play the game.
So our next one here is Griffinary. This is another one that's like you can't set this up enough. You can't reliably gain 3 life a turn enough in this deck in this format in white, right? The food decks typically aren't touching white, and so you may have an incidental food lying around that you can sack, and then, oh great, you get a 2/2 Griffin. I've never seen this card work in this format. I haven't been able to make it work. I haven't tried to make it work. I don't think you should try.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could splash it in a blue-green food deck or a green-black food deck. If you have like some free sources anyway, and you're making like an absurd amount of food. But for the most part, I haven't found that I'm making an absurd amount of food. I found that I'm making a reasonable amount of food. And then, yeah, you have to then sack all those food to gain the life, which that means you're not spending that mana on like casting your creatures. Sure, you get a 2/2, but this is just way too much setup. So no thanks. Pass.
It also only triggers on your end step, and typically you want to leave the mana up to crack the food at instant speed if you can.
Oh yeah,
you can cast so it's just too much going on that makes it difficult to use properly, and I don't like it in this format. Next up, we've got Intangible Virtue. This is one that you read, and in most formats would be pretty phenomenal. You know, giving all your tokens 1/1 and vigilance is great. They're just and I think I was a little lower on this. In white, there aren't as many ways to make tokens. Like, you've got Hopeful Vigil, and you've got like the Trained Troops half of Imidane's Recruiter, and that's Nightly kind of Valor. It. Yeah, Nightly Valor. Like, yeah, there's not a whole lot to do in white to make tokens, so it falls flat there. If this was a black or a red card, it would be phenomenal. And if you can find a way to splash it without ruining your deck in a black-red deck, more power to you. But again, this is one that I just don't see very often worth taking.
Yeah, if you're playing a red-white deck and you have a bunch of the red rat-making cards, then you can play this. If you're playing black-white and you have a bunch of the black rat-making cards, you can play this. Just know your vector. If you have like only 4 or 5 ways to make tokens, I probably wouldn't play this. But if you look at your deck and you have like 10, maybe like 8 to 10 token sources, especially ones that make multiples, like the Ratcatcher Trainee or the Goblin That's Eating Cheese, whatever that thing is called, the Busted Rare. Not that you need a lot of help to win after you play that, but also something funny about this card. The tokens in this set, for the most part, there's some things that make birds, right? The one that whenever an enchantment goes to the graveyard, you get a 1/1 flyer, which we've agreed that just never happens. The funny thing is that the fairies and the rats and the knights are probably the most common tokens, right? The knights already have vigilance. The fairies and the rats can't really block. So, it sort of just reads as like tokens you control get 1/1, and the vigilance basically adds nothing to the worth of this card, which again means that some amount of the value of this card is being lost. So it makes sense that it's a little bit underwhelming. Yeah, and I will play this in decks for sure, but I wouldn't build around it. You know, I wouldn't take this early. I'd take it after I already had the tokens.
Definitely. Next up is Karmic Justice. This is the 3-mana enchantment. This one's a rare in the bonus sheet. Essentially just makes it kind of a you hurt me, I hurt you kind of thing going on. If your opponent can destroy any of your non-creature permanents, you get to do the same. The thing is, this one's a little bit weird because it only triggers if they destroy your non-creatures. You get to destroy anything of theirs, but they have to destroy your non-creatures, and that's just not happening very often in this format. Like maybe they decide to destroy an enchantment like a Grasp of Fate or something of that nature to get their card back. 9 times out of 10, though, most people aren't even playing cards in their deck that destroy enchantments, especially in Best of One.
Yeah.
And that's just... So this is never triggering. It's a 3-mana do nothing.
I have a confession. The first time I read this card, I misread it as destroys a creature permanent you control. And even then, I spent like 10 minutes racking my mind about whether that's something you actually want in a limited deck. Because it would have to specifically destroy. Like burn spells wouldn't work. Exile spells wouldn't work, stuff like that. And then I reread it and said non-creature. I was like, oh, I could have saved myself 10 minutes of my life. I'm never putting this card in a deck. Yeah,
the only decks that ever would want something like this, and this isn't going to happen in this limited format, but they're the ones that are like super controlling, play next to no creatures, a ton of enchantments and planeswalkers, and you don't want your opponent to blow up your stuff. And when they do, it helps you stem the bleeding against whatever they're doing. but don't play this in limited.
Is this one going in that commander deck you were telling me about?
Sure is.
When you said a deck involving a bunch of like Pillow 40 planeswalkers, like, I don't know, propaganda, that type of thing, I was like, hold on. I think he's speaking from experience here.
And last up on this particular slide or this section, we've got Knightly Valor, which we just mentioned briefly. 5-mana aura that ETBs to make a 2/2 and then gives enchanted creature +2/+2 and vigilance. This one's a little awkward. When I first read this card, I thought you could put it on the creature it creates, like a living weapon style. You can't do that. You need to have a target to enchant to play this before you get the 2/2, which is a little awkward. You playing this on an empty board doesn't. You can't actually. You won't be able to cast it. That said, it is a fine-ish card to put in your red-white decks. I think it's a little slow for them typically, so maybe not the best thing you can be doing. But giving your best creature +2/+2 and vigilance, not really a bad thing. And then it comes with the creature; it triggers celebration. So it's got a few things going for it. It's not one that I would say completely stay away from, but I also don't take this highly.
Yeah, I like one Knightly Valor in my red-white decks. I don't have a huge problem with it. I do want to issue a slight correction. You can cast this when you have no creatures on your board. You just have to put it on one of your opponent's things, and then you do
fair
get,
enough. Yeah,
you get a 2/2 that can trump their like 6/6 vigilance or whatever. Also, got to shout out. This one's got some real nice art. I like that kind of beautiful sunscape, that castle in the background, these knights marching with their giant banners. The white ones on this slide, really, really fantastic art. These ones are killer.
I mean, the art on all of these that aren't the anime versions are pretty much all just absolute bombs. Like, they're so good.
Yeah, there's not a miss, to be honest. We recorded the pre-show a while back for our thoughts on the anime version ones. Not the best. Let's move on. Let's talk about land tax. White for an enchantment. This is the one where at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent has more lands than you, you get to tutor up 3 basics and then put them in your hand. Now, usually this type of effect is this is such a unique effect, right? If you're playing Commander, this is great because it means you're going to hit all your land drops. You can pitch your lands to extra things. You can, with a looter, you can loot them away, or you can, I don't know, discard them down to fill your graveyard to fill a delve ability, or like, I don't know. You can abuse this effect more in other older formats. In limited, in particular draft limited like this, I guess you're like tutoring out all your lands. Thinning isn't irrelevant. If you get to trigger this multiple turns in a row, then let's say you're on the draw, right? Your opponent plays a land, they pass the turn, you untap, well, you don't have anything in play. You play your first planes, you play land tax, and you say go. Your opponent has to say, all right, I'm going to play my second land, but then they'll get to draw 3. And then if I play my third, then they'll get to draw 3. So once you start drawing such a volume of cards, you basically will always have 7 cards in hand. You'll discard a bunch of lands, and you will eventually thin out all the basics from your deck. There are some decks that would actually want to do that. I just don't know if it's worth a card to do that. I mean, so that's you never miss a land drop, right?
Well, what you described is the ceiling on this card. You play it turn 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
While your opponent's on the play, you're on the draw and you play it turn 1. That's your the best white deck. This gets.
Yeah.
What decks actually want to do that on turn 1, as opposed to say play a 1-drop or just like keep up like an Archon's Goal? I don't know. Like
Crackety
later in the game,
something.
You do this later in the game. You play this and it just doesn't matter because either you're at parity with lands or your opponent can just stop playing them because they have enough on board to do what they need to do anyway. So in the best scenario, I still don't exactly know what decks want this. The red-white aggro decks typically, like, sure, they would appreciate maybe thinning the deck a little bit, but they're running like relatively few lands. You can get away with like 16 landers, 15 landers in this format. But I think you'd just rather have a creature than this. And just like play your low land count, and like you don't need that many lands, so drawing them doesn't really help you all that much. besides thinning the deck. I just don't think any deck in this format really wants this card.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I was getting a little too excited about land tax.
The only deck I could see, there may be, we talked about this a little bit last week, there may be a very niche, very narrow version of the 5-color deck that would use this for fixing. So you can just go grab off-color basics to kind of filter the cards in your hand properly. That sounds loose, and I need to see it happen before I'm willing to try it, but
yeah, like you're never taking
an opportunity.
You're never taking a land tax over like a Torch the Tower, right? Like I just can't see a world where that's
no, never
something to do. Yeah, no. I'm personally not going to put this one in decks, but for those brave heroes that want to do this and make it work, I want to see your list. Leyline of Sanctity is up next. Can we just issue a one-off thing for ley lines? I don't think any of them are actually playable.
Nope. Next.
Sorry, Leyline of Sanctity. Hexproof, not good enough. Phyrexian Unlife. I am embarrassed to say I did lose to an opponent playing this. It was a red-white mirror match.
Gosh.
They had Phyrexian Unlife, and look, they were playing best of one. I'm sure some black-green deck demolished them after they played this. But they played Phyrexian Unlife and functionally gained 10 for 3 mana. And I was like, well, we've been just like glass cannoning at each other, and they all of a sudden have 50% more life than they started with. So I'm just going to lose now. And I did, because I couldn't block. I had a bunch of rats. So
sure, but like that only works in that matchup. Even like the red-white matchups, that doesn't work because they can just stop attacking and block you. And like most red-white decks just want a 3-drop creature instead of this.
I think you can side this in if you're playing best of 3 against a literal aggro deck. I don't think you should play in any other circumstance. Rest in peace. Well, RIP. Not this time. Not an effect you want in limited. Sorry. Moving on.
Yeah, so next up we've got Smothering Tithe to round out the white cards in Enchanting Tales. Smothering Tithe, phenomenal constructed card, really good in Commander. Way too slow in this format. Don't put it in your white decks.
Mm-hmm. There was a deck in Standard with, do you remember that card Emergency Powers? It was like a 7 mana, both players draw 7, and then if it was your turn, you got to free cast something, I think. It had addendum.
Sure.
There was a deck in Standard, I believe, that had Smothering Tithe and Emergency Powers. So you would cast Emergency Powers with the Tithe in play, and you'd break the symmetry by making 7 treasures after wheeling. That was kind of fun. Unfortunately, WoW Limited does not have any draw 7s, so Smothering Tithe is going to stay on the sidelines.
Similarly, As Foretold is up next. That's the 2 and a blue that lets you like free cast stuff, but you pay 0 to cast them. But you can, it ticks up every turn with counters. You know the card, and you can see it on screen. It's not playable in limited. Just don't. There's not a single deck that wants this. By turn 3, you'd rather just be paying your mana to do the thing instead of like waiting 4 turns to cast a 4-drop for free.
Yeah.
Just don't put this in your decks. Next up is Compulsion. This is the 1 and a blue with 2 activated abilities. You can basically rummage or sack it to draw a card. I don't think there's a home for this in this format. There's just like too much good just card draw in general. There's Quick Study, which triggers all your instant and sorcery matters stuff. There's Into the Fey Court, which does the same and draws you a bunch of cards. I just don't think you need to take the time and mana to do this.
Yeah, I honestly think this would be better if it was just 1 of the blue ETB draw card, no other text. Oh, wait a minute. Prophetic Prism. Never mind.
Right. And that's colorless. So
that's colorless. So yeah, I saw an opponent play this one once and they did not win. So let's use that as a data point. Now you just can't, you can't be doing this nonsense. The format's not for this.
Yeah. And then next up, we've got Copy Enchantment, the 3 mana, just ETB, make a copy of any enchantment on the battlefield. Maybe there's a controlling deck that wants this, but it's very matchup dependent and very dependent upon what you have in your deck as well. So this one I could say is maybe build around, like you might be able to make it work, but I haven't found a deck that actually runs blue and cares about enchantments to the degree that I would want this in my list.
But haven't you considered that if you copy enchantment a Greater Aromancy, then oh wait, that gives them Shroud, right? Never mind. If you copy enchantment a Phyrexian Unlife, you can Wait a minute. No, that doesn't. Maybe if there were better Enchanting Tales, then copy enchantment could get sweet. Like imagine if you had something like this. Was there something like this?
Well, if you have a blue-white deck with a lot
War?
of bargain, or like, yeah, I guess it needs to be in that deck. If you had a blue-white deck with a lot of bargain, which not exactly the deck that does a lot of bargaining, but you could copy like a Princess Takes Flight, and it would still do the exile thing. Like, but that's maybe the best this can do. Or maybe you copy a Grasp of Fate. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not going to do this one. Again, this would be something that you could sideboard in if your opponent shows you Grasp of Fate and Princess Takes Flight. But even then, it might just fizzle and not work. What like the floor on this is you copy like an aura. No thanks.
Right? Yeah, no.
Here's a good one, Curiosity. That's the kind of looter one. It's 1 blue. You stick it on a creature as an aura, and whenever that thing deals damage to an opponent, you draw a card. Not combat damage. So the Wombo combo is if you put it on the Living Catapult, then whenever you tap the Living Catapult to deal damage to your opponent, you get to draw a card. It's super sick. Probably the best thing the Catapult can be doing is having a Curiosity attached to it too. But honestly, I've just stuck this on a fairy a couple times, just on a cheap 1 to 2 mana fairy. And if you have a couple counter spells in hand, you're like, I can't lose, right? If they try to kill it, they lose out on tempo, on mana, and I'm drawing an extra card a turn. Also getting in for damage. Like, you'll just win those games so easily.
Yep. Yeah, this is one of the better ones I've seen.
Yeah, I like that. I like this one a lot. Forced Fruition, I do not. That's the 6 mana. It says whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player draws 7 cards. Are you interested in spending 6 mana to help your opponent draw more cards? Not even that. I get the joke, right? Like the joke is when the opponent casts the spell, by the time you have this on the battlefield, your opponent probably has somewhere between 15 and 23 cards left in their deck. So they can cast like 3 to 4 more spells, probably less, like 2 to 3 more spells in the game, unless they have a way to remove an enchantment, unless they have a way to kill you prior. I mean, you just spent 6 mana to not affect the board. Do you trust that you're not dying on the crackback?
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah, and what if their next 2 spells just win them the game? Then their next 2 spells drew them like half their deck. So then their next spell was even better. This might even draw them into their enchant removal card, right? Or some other way, like their Oof or that what is it, Hilda's Kiss or whatever. So not a big fan of this. I don't think I'd ever put this in a deck.
But Ben, if you put it with our next card, then you're just doing the thing.
Yeah, Fraying Sanity. When they have to discard down to hand size, then it'll mill them out too. That'd be a funny wombo combo. Fraying Sanity is a 3 mana curse. Enchants a player at that player's end step. That's actually each end step. That player mills X, where X is the number of cards put in that graveyard from anywhere this turn. I forget the last set this was printed in, but I remember that this could actually kill you reasonably quickly. What was it? Shadows of Innistrad?
That like one of those sounds like it makes sense. It might have been the one that had Teferi's tutelage in it.
Yeah,
that with this would be ridiculous.
In whatever case, this can actually mill someone out fairly quickly, provided that they're putting cards into their graveyard for whatever reason. That could be instants and sorceries. Oh yeah, if you play such that not a lot of stuff hits your board, a red-white deck, they just hold back for a little bit. Honestly, a red-white deck doesn't care if they get milled. This is the sort of thing that it doesn't actually do anything until it wins you the game. So this means that you are spending a card to not actively like enact a game plan until it ends, right? Milling is just not. I think you need a ridiculously controlling blue deck for you to want to play this as your win condition. You would want like 4 to 5 counter spells and like ways to make sure your opponent was not going to be pressuring you at all. Maybe even like a board wipe or something. Expel the interlopers. I want 2 board wipes before I put this into a deck, because then with board wipes, this actually starts to get kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I played against this card once, and it literally triggered one time to mill me for 1, and then I was like, oh yeah, I can't play instants and sorceries right now, and then I just killed them with my creatures. It's like, It went like 4 or 5 turns went by and it never triggered again.
Wow, the day has come when Zach argues against the blue mill win condition. Who would have thought?
That's not this. This like you said, this doesn't win you the game until it wins you the game. It's like it doesn't actually do anything.
This isn't. What was that one? Patient rebuilding, I think it was the 3 blue, and it would mill your opponent's stuff. And then whenever like a land went in their graveyard, you drew a card. I mean, that was a good mill win condition because it was drawing you extra cards every turn. It was 5 mana and you kind of slammed it after you'd already established some board presence. Now this next one, hatching plans. I have had the opportunity to hatch some plans. Have you?
Yes, I have.
This one is good. This one is really, really, really good. This is maybe the best thing to bargain. No, this has got to be the best thing to bargain. I mean, some of these other cards like Hopeful Vigil. What do they do when they bargain? They scry 2. Wouldn't you rather ancestral yourself and just draw 3 cards? Although some on Twitter apparently think that the best case to use ancestral is to target your opponent. I'm not even going to wade into that discourse because, we've had enough discoursing on Twitter for a while. But hatching plans, yeah. Again, this one doesn't do anything when you play it. It's literally just 1 of the blue. That's it. It just sits there. But then when it's put in a graveyard, you draw 3 cards. Obviously, this works really well with the bargain vector. Blue doesn't have a ton of bargain cards that are super good, even like Diminisher, which I've gone way down on. I think this does pair really well with cards that are cheap interaction. So Candy Grapple and Torch the Tower in particular. If you have either of those, you can pick up a Hatching Plans and just run it. Because what pairs well with card draw? Cheap removal, right?
Yeah, and then this is also just a card like most decks that are playing blue actually don't mind taking turn 2 off to do basically nothing. And so you just kind of throw this out early in the game. Even if you play it late and you have some bargain stuff, like you're likely to have some of those in your hand by later into the game. You just basically like let this sit on the battlefield until you have something to do with it. It doesn't really take up resources as it sits there. It's just 2 mana. This isn't like a 6 mana Force Fruition that just doesn't do anything with, you just spent turn 6 to do nothing. Like, yeah, maybe you take turn 2 off, or you play this and then like play something else on like turn 4 or 5. And maybe you like play this and bargain out a stopgap to tempo out your opponent on the same turn. Like there's just plenty you're not losing much to put this in your deck, and it gains you so much when you can use it. So this is one of the better ones as well. Notice most of the ones we're saying are like pretty good or uncommon in this bonus sheet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was actually thinking of that exact scenario with Stopgap. I had a game where my opponent played a Hatching Plans on 2, just like you said. I had been building out my board. They used Stopgap, sacking Hatching Plans to bounce it on my tokens, and then you draw Stopgap, draw 4 cards. I was like, okay. I'm not even mad. Like, that's awesome.
So I'm going to shortcut our next 4 here. We've got Intruder Alarm, Kindred Discovery, Leyline of Anticipation, and Omniscience. Put none of these in your decks. Move on with your life.
And just double checking. Intruder Alarm. Yeah, we already talked about that one today. Kindred Discovery. What, you don't want to put this in like a Blue-Black Fairies deck?
For 5 mana? No, I just play Into the Fey Court, draw 3 cards on the spot, and move on with my life.
Good point. And we're certainly not putting a Leyline or Omniscience into our deck. Omniscience, look, it's just too much. Oh, Rhystic Study. Let's chat about this one. I haven't seen it in play yet. I don't have a lot of data on this, but I gotta say I haven't taken it, and I've had the opportunity to. I've seen it go pretty late. I think the general consensus is that it sucks, but I just feel like there's a world where this effect, 3 mana, your opponent's spells cost 1 more to cast. The thing is, this card is worse than that because it does have the drawback of your opponent can choose to cast a spell anyway and just let you draw. I guess particularly like a red-white deck that doesn't care how many cards you have in hand when you die to them, they wouldn't be that bothered by a turn 3 Rhystic Study. They would say, all right, draw as many cards as you want. You're going to be dead in 2 turns anyway. And the cards you draw probably won't be able to get you out of it. So I think this one is unplayable. But it's Rhystic Study. Can I dream a little bit?
Well, I mean, most of us are familiar with Rhystic Study in a commander context where you're drawing 3 extra cards a turn on it, and that is obviously very good. To put us into perspective, Ristic Study on 17 lands currently doesn't have enough of them seen to have a game in hand win rate, but it has a games played win rate of 47.5%. It is currently the 6th worst card in the set.
Wow. Okay, so abysmal.
Yeah, don't touch it.
Spreading Seas is a funny one. Our last blue one here. This one is the one of the blue aura. You enchant a land, and that land becomes an island, and you draw a card. Kind of a funny bargain enabler. I don't like it quite as much as Hatching Plans, but if you're on the play, your opponent plays like a mountain, and then you Spreading Seas it. Sometimes you just win that game for free. Like you just auto win, your opponent just scoops on the spot. They can't do a thing. They kept a hand with like 3 red cards and like a plains, and they're like, uh-oh. Plus it draws you a card. Like the investment's pretty low, and you can always bargain it away in the late game. You might even forget it's there. You can fix your own mana with this if you're playing like blue-black and you need your second blue source, just enchant one of your swamps. It's super versatile. Lowest it can do is just cycle for 2, right?
Yeah, that said, it is taking a card slot in your deck, so you do kind of need a little bit extra to do with it, like bargain or maybe you're really low on fixing and you need to, like Ben was saying, kind of get yourself an extra island when you're kind of mana screwed. I did get this play. I've seen this played against me. I've never played with it. I haven't found myself wanting to put it in any of my decks, but it did it was played against me in pretty successful fashion. Still won the game that it was played against me, but it did lock down one of my 2 mountains, and it did stop me from casting a bunch of the red cards in my hand. So that exact scenario you described, I've been on the receiving end of that. I still won the game though, so it is low effort, but all it takes is someone to top deck a land, and then true. They're fine again. So I don't know if a 2 mana cycler is good enough in your deck to actually warrant taking up a card slot, but
I think it's usually fine. I did actually have an opponent enchant my swamp with it, and it actually fixed my mana for me. I was playing blue-black.
There you go.
Next up is Bitter Blossom. This is one of the best cards for limited of all time. I mean, yes. These fairies can block, and that actually that is a big deal. And it also has the added upside of, if you ever get too low life total, if you're down to like 5 or 4 and you're starting to worry about dying your own Bitter Blossom, you can bargain it away. Like this thing, if on turn 2, I mean, do you have the 17 lands data up for this one? It's probably really good, right?
Yeah, it's in the top 20. 61.2% game in hand win rate.
Yeah. Could you check the opening hand win rate for it, actually?
Yeah, opening hand is 67.9%.
So what games when you start with it in hand win 7% more than when you don't. And even just like drawing it at all leads to a 60%. That is about what you'd expect for a Bitter Blossom. This card's awesome. We got Dark Tutelage here. That is the 3 mana Bob effect. At the beginning of your upkeep, you flip the top card of your library and you lose life equal to its mana value. I like this one for similar reasons to Bitter Blossom, except it gives you a card instead of a 1/1 fairy. I think sometimes you'd rather have the 1/1 fairy and only lose the 1 life. It's kind of like you're flipping a card with Bitter Blossom every turn that just says like free cast this, you make a fairy. But Dark Tutelage can do some cool stuff, especially if you're playing like a cheaper like black-white deck or a green-black deck with a bunch of bargain and food stuff. And sure, you might, dome yourself for 6 with a Hamlet Glutton sometimes, or 7, I guess. But you can just sack some food. It ETBs to gain 3 life. You can bargain it away if you get too low. I do like this one. I haven't had a really good Dark Tutelage deck, but I played it in I think 1 or 2 lists, and it was just fine.
Yeah, I think Dark Tutelage is a confusing one because there are certain vectors that do benefit from having a Dark Tutelage in the deck. Mostly, I think they're the green-black food decks that can kind of recoup the life you're losing, or have ways to scry lands to the top so you draw the land off the tutelage, don't take any damage, and then you draw a real card for your turn. I will say tutelage has a 48.6% game in hand win rate. It's not actually putting up good numbers. Ooh. So I think that says something about the types of decks people are putting it into. It's not just like, ooh, I'm running black, let me put a Dark Tutelage in my deck. You're likely not going to get ahead on that exchange. And there are better ways to draw cards in the format. So
yeah, I think that's probably just people. Those people are playing the card incorrectly by flipping non-lands off of it. You're supposed to flip the lands off the top. That's the key.
Well, and again, like in a serious manner, like if you can scry repeatedly, I did play against somebody who was scrying. They had one of the, I think it was a creature that like when an enchantment enters the battlefield, you scry or something to that effect. And they were scrying almost every turn, so they could just put lands on top, do exactly what I described, and it worked really well for them. But 9 times out of 10, I'm playing like a remotely aggressive blue-black deck or a red-white deck or a black-red deck, and I'm just like happy to see this hit my opponent's battlefield because I'm like, cool, you're just helping me.
Yeah, you got to be smart when you play Dark Tutelage. You can't just jam this in any vector and expect it to work.
Wow, Ben, I think you did this on purpose, but the next 4 we can just kind of lump together again.
I'm going to challenge that.
Okay.
Although, let's talk about Leyline and Oppression. I think we can just junk those real quick. Leyline of the Void and Oppression. Yeah. Oppression is just not worth playing a card for. Necropotence and Grave Pact. These two suffer from similar issues, which is that they both cost triple black. That being said, they're both extremely powerful once they hit the board. I would like to cast both of these before the format ends. I'll say that. I think they are playable. I think you can do stuff. Necro, you skip your draw step and you can pay life to exile the top card of your library, and then that card goes to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So you just have to pay life to draw cards, and you no longer have a draw step. It's not the best thing in the world. If you want to draw like 6 cards right off the bat, then this can refill your hand. So it can do cool stuff that way, but triple black. Same with Grave Pact. If you can make it so that whenever they block one of your rats and your rat dies, they have to sack a creature, it kind of gives all of your stuff way better death touch, where whenever any of your things die, one of their things has to die too. That can bring boards to a parity really effectively, and it's really hard to lose creature-based matchups with a Grave Pact in play. You can usually leverage it to, I mean, just think about it. As long as you have more creatures than your opponent, then you can't really ever die to creatures. You could hold them back, chump with them, then they have to sack the thing too.
Because the decks that play this are building out their board with rats, which can't block. So the rats, and they're 1/1. So your opponent's just like, sure, I take 4, I guess. And eventually the rat's going to kill them anyway, or they're going to block the rats or whatever. And I guess at that point,
they can't take 4 forever, though.
No. But like, I don't know. It just feels like, at that point, they're dead anyway. Like, you're going to wipe their board, and then you'll play more rats and kill them. Or they take the damage from the rats and they die. I don't know. Like, it just feels like it's a little loose.
Yeah. You're saying it's like win more hard to cast.
It's win more in a very specific deck, and it's only really 1 or 2 decks that can even cast the card.
Well, maybe without a Prophetic Prism or some other fixing or E-Wilds. All right, I'm going to play this one.
Grave Pact.
I'm going to play this one like once this format. Same with Necro. If I ever see them, they're both mythics. I could go the whole format and never even see them once. I never saw Wormcoil Engine during Brothers War, so I might just never see these. And these aren't the types of cards people pass, so who knows? Maybe I'll get to open one sometime. Yeah, I think you're right. Let's finish up black here. Oversold Cemetery. This one's fine if you're dumping creatures in your graveyard, but there's not a lot of cards that can do that, so I'm kind of off it.
Yep.
Polluted Bonds is a junker. It's involving lands, and same with Sanguine Bond, just like these 5 mana enchantments that don't do anything. Let's breeze past those for Stab Wound, aka True Name Nemesis. Now, Stab Wound, 3 mana, enchanted creature gets -2/-2, and then at the beginning of that creature's controller's upkeep, that player loses 2 life. So the joke with this one is you can use it to kill their 2/2 or whatever, or their 3/2, yeah. But if you can land this on a 2/4 or a 1/3 or something that is going to stick around, and you can functionally negate its influence on the board by using Stab Wound on it. Maybe don't attack into it because you want it to stick around. They have a very short clock. I've seen opponents use premium removal spells to kill their own Stab Wounded creature because they knew that otherwise they're just going to die to it, and that was their only out. So that's an even better 2-for-1 than you'd have originally by just draining a bunch of life per turn. Stab Wound is awesome. I win tons of games after casting a Stab Wound. You just got to be a little smart about how you play it, when you play it, what you play it on. But it does behave a lot like a true name Nemesis, where they're taking 2 unblockable damage every turn. Guess it's a powered down true name, but this card's awesome. Super high pick.
Well, yeah, it's flexible. It's got like different. It fits in a number of different vectors, and it does serve like multiple functions in that way. Ironically, well, I suppose I'll phrase it this way. Would you believe me if I told you that Stab Wound has a lower game in hand win rate than both Land Tax and Evolving Wilds?
Oh no.
Yeah, it's got a 55.2% win rate. Land Tax is at a 55.4 game in hand win rate.
Whoa. That's actually the more surprising thing, that Land Tax, I thought you were going to say something horrific like these are in the 40s. Land Tax being plus 55 is... All right. Maybe I'll have to try a land... Oh, duh. You use Land Tax to get 3 swamps to play Necro.
And then you bargain away Land Tax?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could just bargain it away. We cracked the code. I guess one caveat we should mention, all of these enchantments, especially the ones that ETB to do something, you can just bargain them away. Like, that's one of the jokes. Stab Wounds is just... It's great.
All right, next up we've got Vampiric Rites. This one is... In this format, it's kind of like Goblin Bombardment Light. Paying 2 mana to end sacking a creature to do the thing is a lot more expensive than just being able to sack a creature. Sure, this draws you a card, which is way better than just pinging your opponent for 1 in most cases, but I haven't actually seen a deck that wants Vampiric Rites or does the thing with Vampiric Rites well. Because the decks that want Vampiric Rites traditionally are decks that make a bunch of tokens. The black decks that make a bunch of tokens in this format are making rats. Those are very aggressive decks. You kind of don't care about this effect in those decks.
Yeah, the ideal thing to do with this is to be an Aristocrats deck, and then this is your sack outlet. Those decks want like a repeatable sack outlet. You have like a drain effect where whenever your creature dies, your opponent loses 1 and you gain 1, and then you're drawing more cards and stuff. The real reason to play this is to chump block, right? You put your 1/1 in front of their 5/5, then before damage you sack, draw a card, gain a life. That's hard for some like red-green decks to grind through. This could be one of those decks' worst nightmares. But in this case, I don't think this has a home in the format. Maybe like a black-white tokens deck, but like you're never sacking a night token. You can sack rats, but I don't know. I don't
can't block with them, so you lose that part of the equation.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Me neither. Next up is Waste Not. This is a fun card, one that people have built some crazy decks around. 2 mana, whenever an opponent discards a creature, you make a 2/2. If they discard a land, you add 2 black. And if they discard a non-creature, non-land, you draw a card. So very modal. There's just not a whole lot of discard in this format. There's not a lot of ways to force your opponent to discard. There's also then the weird late game sort of you top deck this and they don't have any cards in hand anyway. It's just not... There's just... Yeah, this is another one there's just not a home for in this format.
Waste not a slot in your deck for this card. How about that?
Yeah. Moving on to red, we've got Aggravated Assault here. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment. Obviously, it takes a rare in this slot. And then you have to pay 5. It's an activated ability that untaps all your creatures. You basically get an extra combat. I mean, that can be effective. I think this is a card that the aggressive decks would just rather not have. Like, you'd rather just have a creature than potentially wait to do this over 8 mana. Like, I don't know, it feels like very win more in those decks.
Yeah, I will say I had an opponent cast this and I did lose to it once after they had activated it. They were beating me down with it was like a mono red almost rare pile. It seemed like they were the only player at the table that were playing red. They had like the 3/3 haste dragon celebrant guy, and I think they had the goblin 3/3, the trash master guy. Like they were going to destroy me no matter what. And then they played this and I was like, you know what? I think they were going to win regardless. That aligns with what we were saying. I can't see a red deck that wants to take off turn 3 to not affect the board, and then also take off turn 5 to functionally not affect the board.
Well, if you're doing the turn 5 thing, like, you better win the game.
Yeah.
So this is really, again, I would rather have a gnawing crescendo most of the time than this.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely an Imidane's Recruiter.
Oh yeah.
Next up, we've got Blood Moon. Don't put it in your decks. It's just not. We're playing limited here. Like, what are you doing?
Good art though. Dragon Mantle. This one's whatever. You can put it in your red decks. It's a cantrip for cheap, just 1 red. This is good in the celebration decks because it adds an extra permanent to the field, draws you a card, gives something fire breathing that can be valuable, unlike a trampler. So red green can make some use of this. This one's just fine though, like cuttable for sure.
Unless you have a Kellen. If you have Kellen, this card is stupid good.
Oh, that thing has double strike, right?
It sure does.
Oh,
and
okay.
it like reanimates stuff. I think. I had it played against me with a Kellen in pre-release, and it was just ridiculously good.
That sounds kind of cool. Fire Emancipation. 3 red, red, red. It triples the damage your stuff deals. Burn spells, creatures. I did try to make this one work. I played 4 copies of the catapult, and I was like, oh, I can like tap to deal 3 damage instead of 1. My opponent killed all my catapults and countered Emancipation. So I'm gonna go with a no on this one.
The decks that I've seen this played against me, and it was actually quite nerve-wracking. And I don't remember if I actually think I ended up winning that game. But they played this in a red-green deck that had a ton of ramp. Utopia Sprawl, Root Rider Fawns. Okay. And then you just play it on turn 4, and everything after that is like everything's lethal.
That's kind of cool.
So, it also had like a Garruk's Uprising. So it was like one of those like 4 power or greater decks, but then it ran this.
Going big.
Yeah, literally everything was lethal. I still think I won that game though. So
yeah, again, let's just use the Torch the Tower test. I would not take this over a Torch the Tower.
No.
The next 2, Goblin Bombardment and Impact Tremors. These 2 share the exact same vector, and that's rats slash the hyper-aggressive red decks, which can be red-white or red-black. I've played both of these in red-white, and both have done well. Goblin Bombardment is much better. This one, you don't need the creature to enter after the Impact Tremor, which is a little awkward bit of Impact Tremors. But sometimes your red-white deck, you just don't have anything to do on turn 2, and you're like, okay, Impact Tremors. Then you make like 5 creatures over the next couple turns, and 2 mana deal 5 to your opponent. Yeah, that's worth playing. It really puts this clock on, this inevitability that some decks just can't outpace it. Goblin Bombardment fulfills a very similar role, but it is just so much better because that 1 damage can go to any target. So Goblin Bombardment is better in vacuum, but I do play both of these in my red-white and red aggressive decks.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on, we've got Leyline of Lightning, Mana Flare. Neither of these are playable. Just don't touch them. Mana Flare is a fun one if you're actually drafting in paper and you want it for constructed, not a limited card. We've got Raid Bombardment, which is the third of this kind of trio, the Goblin Bombardment, Impact Tremors, Raid Bombardment. All 3 of these go into the same decks, and if you're going heavy rats, Raid Bombardment will do phenomenal things for you, whether the rats get blocked or not. They're still taking 1. This does have the flexibility of also hitting planeswalkers. Not that that's a thing now that we have one per set essentially going forward. So probably won't matter about that. But hey, yeah, making sure you get in for 1 no matter what is still going to be very effective and will help you win games.
Funny enough, Impact Tremors plus Raid Bombardment kind of equals a Goblin Bombardment in my mind on power level and card quality. I think Goblin Bombardment is still better than this one too.
Well, the fun part is that like you put Impact Tremors down, then you play Raid Bombardment, and then you just make a bunch of rats, and like you're hitting 1 when they ETB, and if you have the Goblin Bombardment out too, like if you have all 3, then you attack with the rats, even if they get blocked, you sack them. Hey, I mean, 2 of them are uncommon, so it can happen.
It can, but then you are spending a lot of time playing these non-board affecting things. Right. If you're playing against like another red deck, you will lose if you spend the first 3 turns playing these 3 trios. I like playing exactly one of these because look, you got to have slots for removal and stuff like that too.
Yeah, and then next up we've got Repercussion. This is 1 red for a mythic in this set, and it says whenever a creature is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to that creature's controller. This is also your creatures, so this is like a synergistic thing. It will hurt you as well. Don't put this in your decks. It's not worth it.
It's one of those you spend a card for a symmetrical effect type deals, similar to like Sanguine Bond or all those things. You just can't spend a card to do nothing.
Well,
or at least
will
even to
hurt
create a
you.
symmetrical effect. Yeah. It'll hurt your opponent too. But people just won't block, right? All right, here's the last one of that kind of rat army. This is the only one that I haven't actually seen in play of that group. Shared Animosity. The 2 in a red, whenever a creature you control attacks, gets 1/1 until a turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. I think this is actually second behind Goblin Bombardment. I think it's power ranking wise, Goblin Bombardment, then Shared Animosity, then Impact Tremors, then Raid Bombardment. Although I'm not too sure about the last two. Those could be flipped. This one is good because, well, first of all, this one is going only in rats, right? You can't, maybe you get like a red-white mice deck or a red-white humans deck, but even then it has to be a really weird draft for you to wind up with that. If you're playing black-red rats, though, if you can make like, I don't know, if you have like 10 cards that make rats, then this is going to be pretty sick.
Yeah. It is a 3-mana do nothing the turn you play it, right? So it is another one of those that like hits the board and you're kind of taking time off to not progress your game plan. A little bit win more in that way, but it turns your rats into like real, like serious threats. I mean, if you've got a bunch of like 4/4/4s attacking that, or 4/1s or whatever, like that's a big deal relative to otherwise having 1/1s.
Imagine you play this with the Song of Totentans. You like play this on turn nuts. 6, and then turn 7 you attack for 1 trillion damage. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
If only it gave trample. Sneak Attack. Last red one here. Nope. You can't play Sneak Attack. Sorry.
No.
Leave this to Vintage Cube. Unless you're putting a literal Eldrazi Titan into play, it's usually not worth playing a Sneak Attack. Although recently Magic has printed some other good targets. Archon of Cruelty, Atraxa, World Spine Worm is a reasonable one to put in. These things you can all put into play in Vintage Cube off of these. And then an Eldrazi with Annihilator. But Sneak Attack, you can't just put in like a 5/5 with this. You'll just lose.
No, whatever you're playing with this has to win you the game on the spot, and there just aren't really any cards that do that in this format.
Next up is Defense of the Heart. This one is a little strange. 4 mana, at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls 3 or more creatures, sacrifice Defense of the Heart, search your library for up to 2 creatures, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. I actually had this in my pre-release pool. I never drew it, so I cannot say how it is, and I've never seen this one cast. So do you have any data points on this?
No, it is a mythic, so it's not going to come up too often. I think there's too much conditional in this. I'd rather play like a 4-mana beefy creature in my green decks, and like I think that sums up most of these. Is like I'd much rather just put a creature in my deck instead of playing this enchantment that has a bunch of like clauses that I need to fulfill in order to get the thing. Like if your opponent just never has 3 or more creatures, if they already have 3 or more, they can potentially like do some weird stuff to get rid of one if they need to.
Bargain a token away or something.
Yeah, I mean there are just plenty of ways to kind of mess with this, and then like it does nothing the turn you play it, so it's take turn 4 off. It's gotta survive to your upkeep, and they have to have 3 or more creatures on the board. And then you've got to have, I mean, I guess, yeah, grabbing 2 creatures no matter what is going to be good, but yeah, it's just not, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I want to say this card could have a home in like a defensive green-blue deck or something with a lot of interaction, bounce, stuff like that, counter spells. And maybe your opponent builds out a little bit, and then you go tutor out your like horned lock whale or something, and like a Hamlet Glutton, and you immediately stabilize the board. Then that is definitely worth 4 mana. You just have to be able to set it up properly. I just haven't gotten the chance.
Removal in this format is too efficient. I think like you go through all that work and then your opponent just stopgaps your Glutton or your Horned Lock Whale or whatever, which I guess those aren't great stopgap targets, but maybe they just cast a cooped up. You just went through all this work and now they just locked your creature down.
Or a Song of Totentans or a Rat Overrun or whatever. Yeah.
It's slow. It's not. Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Doubling Season. Let's just say our piece for this and the 2 adjacent cards to it. None of these are playable. You don't really make. I don't think even with like Gruff Triplets or like a red-green rats deck or like a white-green, like a 5 mana thing. By this point, you've already made as many tokens of rats and knights as you want. You're not doubling counters. Counters aren't really a thing in this set. Rolls kind of take the place of that. So nope, not interested in any of these.
Nope. So next up, we've got Garrick's Uprising. This one I think is playable. It's the 3 mana that power 4 greater matters. You just draw a bunch of cards. The creatures you control have trample part is usually not relevant because most of the green creatures in this format seem to have trample already. The ones that you're putting in these decks. Or a monster roll. Yeah. So the trample part's not super relevant, but it is a great way to recur cards in those decks. And a lot of those decks, it's pretty easy to put 4 power creatures in your deck. So I do like Garrick's Uprising. It's not usually a 3 mana do nothing. Like at least it's going to cantrip most of the time, and then like it'll sit around and collect value as you continue to play your game plan. So this one's fine.
You know, I just realized that's in the Draft Chaff cube. We get a new art, a new promo.
Yeah,
sweet.
Sure is. Next up, we've got Ground Seal. This is 1 and a green for a similar-ish effect. ETB, draw a card, and then cards in graveyards can't be targets of spells or abilities. This one feels very sideboardy to me. I haven't bothered putting it any in my decks. Don't think it's worth really taking a card slot in your deck unless you know you're against a deck that cares a lot about targeting cards in graveyards. There just aren't very many of those in this format.
What if your opponent had the uncommon back for seconds, right?
Sure.
Yeah, or like what if you saw 2 of them? Then I might side this in. If I had seen both that and I had a bunch of bargain stuff, because ETB, it draws a card and then you can bargain the way later when, well, I guess then that would unlock their back for seconds, whatever. I don't know. This one doesn't seem great to me.
Yeah, and then the next 2 are Hardened Scales and Leyline of Abundance. We kind of lumped all the ley lines together, not really playable. Hardened Scales falls into the doubling season kind of thing. They're just 1/1 counters aren't a thing in this format. Like you just almost never see them. There are a few cards that do make them. There are some the green cards, like I think Elusive Otter might be one, and then there's the one that like distribute 3 +1/+1 counters on up to things. Sure.
Picnic Ruiner, yeah. That one, if you had like 3 Picnic Ruiners and then maybe Hardened Scales.
It's worth the card slot. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there may be a vector in which Hardened Scales is actually worth the card slot in your deck. I haven't seen the support for it, and I don't think it's worth. This is we talked about it on some of the earlier ones. This is one that you don't take highly and then try to build the deck around. It's like, oh, hey, look, I have 2 or 3 Picnic Ruiners. I've got an Elusive Otter or whatever. I can see a way to make a bunch of counters. Sure, Hardened Scales fits my deck. I'll take that.
All right, our last couple rows here. Nature's Will. 4 mana. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, tap all lands that player controls and untap all lands you control. Just no.
Yeah.
Silly effect. No thanks. Next are Parallel Lives and Primal Vigor. These are the other token / counters doublers. Beautiful art. No thanks. Prismatic Omen, 1 of the green. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to the other types. The ultimate fixer. You still don't want to spend a card to do this. This is not a land that taps for mana or a land that helps turn this on. Like Dryad of the Elysian Grove. That's an enchantment creature that does this effect functionally, right? That's a 3 mana 2/4. That can actually do stuff, right? Just putting an enchantment into play that does this is not worth the card.
Next, Season of Growth. Season of Growth is one that I've come up on a little bit, having seen it worked well. This is one that fits into very specific vectors. The ETB Scry one is fine, not something that is worth taking a card. And then if you have a deck that's very heroic in nature, you're casting a bunch of stuff that targets your own creatures, then it becomes a card draw engine and it's worth it. I think if you can draw 2 cards off of this reliably, it's probably worth putting in the deck. And there are decks that can do this. I've seen some good white-green decks that do, target. I don't think this triggers properly off of things that, well, I guess they have to target. All the things that make rolls target the creature to put the roll on. So I guess that works. But typical. Yeah. So that's kind of where you want to be. The green-white decks that can put a bunch of auras on things will let you kind of take advantage of Season of Growth. Otherwise, yeah, I don't really like it. You've got to be in a specific vector for this one.
Yeah, this card has some play to it for sure. Something cool about the templating is that it's not non-token. You see that come up on these sometimes. So if you have a bunch of token makers, I mean, when you're scrying 2, or actually scrying 1 twice is better than scrying 2, right? So when you're scrying multiple times a turn, then, that can be something.
Oh, I think actually this was the deck I saw with the Dark Tutelage. So they had Season of Growth and Dark Tutelage. And
that's
every creature
cool
was like
interaction.
yeah. So that's actually good. I also misread that, and I thought for a moment that it was ETB Scry 1. This is when creatures enter the battlefield Scry 1. So it actually is a 2-mana do nothing. But if you can combo it with a creature in the same turn, then you get the Scry right away. And yeah, you can kind of do some things. But again, it has a home. I think it has a home in a very specific vector. That happened to be a black-green deck, which there are plenty of black cards that generate auras, make rolls and such. So it can have a home there for sure. But be very careful about, again, what your deck is doing, and does this card synergize with the rest of your deck effectively. Next up, we've got Unnatural Growth. This is the 1 quad green. So it's 5-mana card. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. This can be a game ender, but it's actually a trap. Like it looks like it's like, oh crap, like I get to pay 5 mana and then double all my things every turn. Yeah, it feels like a trap to me. I mean, I have seen it played against me once, and I'm pretty sure I lost that game, but like, I don't know, probably just to win more.
Yeah, let's be honest. This doesn't cost 5. You're playing this like on turn 10 when you have your quadruple green, or maybe you fix with a prismatic omen or some junk like that. The casting cost in green isn't as egregious as like the Necropotence casting cost,
right?
Because green tends to have more filtering, and even mana dorks that can help tap for additional green pips. Even our next card, Utopia Sprawl, can help with this. So again, I think you could try this in a certain deck, but you need other things to help. Like if this just doubles your power, it doesn't always change the combat math that much. Maybe if you combine this with tramplers or with flyers or something else, but then again, like you said, that's pretty win more. I'm not interested in this card ever. Like again, the Torch the Tower test. I would take Torch the Tower over this every single time.
Yeah, I think there is a deck that I would take this over Torch the Tower, but if we're talking pack one, pick one, I'm taking Torch the Tower. But that's almost all of these are build arounds if they're playable at all. So I do think like, I mean, it doubles power and toughness, so it does kind of change combat math. I mean, it forces your opponents to block. You don't want to get smacked with like a 4/4 that's now attacking as an 8/8.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's each combat. It's not just yours, so you can use it on defense as well.
Oh, I missed that each combat. They're not usually templated that way. Okay, I do remember when this was originally printed in Limited. It was a huge groan when your opponent would land it. All right, maybe I'll try this one once and see if I can get it to work. But that casting cost is rough.
Oh yeah, well, and you have to remember too, like this is the deck that also has access to our next card. It also has access to Root Rider Fawns and whatever prismatic prisms and such that you can filter in the 4 green pretty easily. This almost reads in the deck that wants to play it anyway. It almost reads like a 4 and a green, or maybe 2 and 3 and 2 green or something. I think it does though. Like a lot of those decks, it's really easy. You've got all the different ramp spells that let you go like grab forests and stuff. Like I don't actually think it's that hard to cast in the decks that want to play it anyway.
Sometimes,
but again, this one fits in a very narrow sort of vector. Like you don't just put this in every green deck.
Sometimes your red-white opponent is going to be beating down, and they will have locked down your 3/3 and your 4/4 with auras, or exiled one, or bounced one, and you're going to be getting run over by rats, and you're going to go, man, I would kill for a Hamlet Glutton off the top right now. And you're going to rip Unnatural Growth, and you're going to look at your board of creatures that can't do anything against their massive rat army. This helps you go super tall in a format that seems to be a little more about going wide, at least for the decks that want to attack. So I'm very skeptical of this one. I think I may try to play it once though if the opportunity arises.
It is also an atrocious top deck. If you have nothing on board, it just doesn't do anything for you. This is I would say lean toward thinking this is a trap, but I think there is a deck that will be okay playing this and actually use it effectively. But if you never take it in the format, I think you're probably still just doing fine. Our next one, however, Utopia Sprawl. This is like, I take this over a lot of cards. This is a very effective card.
Same.
1 mana, ramp, fix, all the things. It's a major groan test. If I see my opponent play this on turn 1, I'm like, ugh, I'm losing this game. Put it in every green deck.
Have you ever seen or been subject to what turn 1 Utopia Sprawl, turn 3 Return from the Wilds, the 3-mana ramp spell?
Oh yeah, I did that in pre-release.
Oh my God, you did? That's so disgusting. So then your opponent plays their second land and you untap with like 5 mana perfectly fixed.
Yeah, you play a turn 3 or turn 4 Gruff Triplets. Yeah.
yeah, like turn 4 Gruff Triplets. Easy, right? This card is awesome. The only downside is that it's not a great top deck. And even then, in some decks, like that Tangle Span thing, you can proc aura stuff.
Yeah.
Or even just bargain it away if you don't need the mana anymore. But even in the late game, sometimes you're still trying to do like, this card's great for splashing the Goose Mother, big like splashy top end things like that, or even like splashing the Song of Totentons, which I think is actually a pretty valid thing to do. Just pay like 8 mana, make 7 rats and swing. Utopia Sprawl does all that while still letting you get on the board super quickly. You do need to make sure you have a good number of forests, though. I wouldn't go under 8 forests if you're playing Utopia Sprawl. Well, that's it. Those are all of our Enchanting Tales and Enchanting Fails. I think more fails than tales, but Certainly. Maybe we'll have some tales to tell about some of those fails. If all else fails, we'll I don't know. We'll be the tail end of the joke, I guess.
Oh God. All right. I think we have an hour and a half limit for you these days. You start spewing nonsense.
Past that, I start getting weird.
Oh man. Anyway, I mean, I appreciate the puns. That's it for us though this week. Thank you so much for listening. Do check us out in the Discord if you haven't been there already. Again, the link to that is in the episode description as well as on our Twitter page. Go check out the Patreon. Get ready for the relaunch of that. We're very excited. Don't forget limited edition pins to people who sign up during the launch and pre-existing patrons. And then if you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter or X or whatever at DraftChaffPod. Thanks, folks, and we'll catch you next week.
All right, I have a help request in my sign off today. I teach, right? I work at a high school. I bring lunch most days. Some days I buy lunch from the teacher cafeteria. They got a guy in there who makes good stuff, as I mentioned today in my long-winded pre-show recording about grapes and such off. But I'm curious. I've started eating less, not fully gluten-free. I do not have celiacs, but I found that eating less straight up bread has vastly improved my daily life. So, and I'm also lactose intolerant, which does really cut down my sandwich options when casual bread and cheese no longer leads to the best afternoons for me. So what I'm curious about, maybe if anyone else out there has, similar afflictions, or maybe if you just eat lunches that are separate from that, I'm curious, people that like bring lunches to work, what do you people eat for lunch? Because the more I meet like adults in working life, the more I realize everyone has like, I've met some teachers in my school who will eat just peanut butter and crackers, and that is their lunch. And they survive and thrive off that. And then I meet other people that carefully meal prep. Well, yeah, thrive might be an exaggeration, but they're well-beloved teachers that do this. I meet other people that they carefully craft their meal preps, like down to calorie counting and every last detail accounted for. So I know where you fall on the end of that spectrum. I am curious for A, what other people do for their lunch breaks, and B, do you have any recs for me? Because ideally ones that are dairy and gluten-free. I know chicken and rice I've gotten as one of my pieces of advice once. So curious to hear what people's takes on this are. Maybe toss this in the random channel in Discord.
Do you want my advice now, or do you want me to go in the Discord? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to do that too, you know. But
there's this awesome snack actually that's gluten-free and dairy-free. They're called grapes. Have you ever considered bringing grapes?